working on his ego project right now.
All right, Sam.
Okay, so Hippocrates, let me just focus this a little. Hippocrates was one of the first people to acknowledge that you could see organs and tissues in the body. And he was quoted as saying, "Behold the eyes, behold the body." And it is true on so many levels, you have no idea. What I'm going to be talking about today is on the physical level, but you can also see emotions, and you can also see something called time risk, which is where you can, there's a clock in your eye that shows where events in the past, traumatic events, have happened, and they actually show if you don't change the course of your life health-wise, where they potentially could happen, you know, in 5-10 years. There's an actual clock in there. So anyway, Denny Johnson, he was one of the people who has written a book about the personality that you can see in the eye, and there's basically 4 types of personality. So you can decide with the eyes, you know, with working with children or even adults or partners, you can actually see who's going to be compatible. You can see who's introverted, who's extroverted. The eye is totally, totally amazing. So Denny Johnson said, you can save lives, and I just saw him a week ago in Orlando. I was at a seminar. He comes from California. But he said you can save lives, but if they don't accept responsibility for how they got into the condition they're in, you have done nothing for the soul. Because he actually studies souls in the eyes. He has made a science out of many decades of showing you if you're having problems in your kidney or your liver, he has connected it to a grandparent from either your father's side or your mother's side. And it actually, in his studies, goes back to somebody being mad at somebody else in prior generations. So that's what he means by if you're not fixing it at the soul level, which I was like, well, what's the solution for that? You know, that's in the past, this is the present. And his solution actually had to do with saying prayers of forgiveness for relationships that existed, you know, in past generations that became traumas in their body that genetically they passed on. Because in this day and age, we all know that emotions are the main reason most people are getting sick and choosing not to take care of themselves. Everybody knows what is good to be eating, but you know, they still aren't choosing to do that. It's not new anymore to tell you that soda is not good for you. But how many people do we know still drinking soda instead of water? You know, that's kind of insane. So that has to do with emotions, actually. So there is a big emotional component. So iridology is a science that is 3,000 years old. This is not new by any means. They have found carvings in rocks in Mesopotamia, and they were first found in the Chaldeans. I need my page turned, please, sir. And I just have a few references here to tell you how it began, that we first started documenting it. The first documented reference can be credited to the physician Philippus Mayans in his book Chiromatica Medica, published in 1670 in Dresden. Dr. Ignaz von Paisley was one of the people that most commonly is known as the father of iridology, because as a young Hungarian boy, he had an owl for a pet, and when the owl broke his leg, he noticed that the owl formed a certain line and marking in its large eye that he could clearly see. And as the leg began to heal, he noticed that line getting smaller and smaller. So that's when, as an 11-year-old, he first started saying, you know, I wonder if this is true for other known conditions. So he started studying people as he got older with known conditions to see if they all had the same marking in the same spot. In a similar time period, another person, Nils Lydequist in Stockholm, Sweden, also published a book in 1893 doing the same thing in another part of the world, came up with the same iris map of how people with known conditions, hundreds of them, all had the same markings, and their maps both were the same. Dr. Bernard Jensen, has anyone heard of Dr. Bernard Jensen? Okay, he's one of the greats. Back in like 100 years ago, there was several men that were just great naturalist healers. There was Dr. Bernard Jensen, Dr. Max Gerson, who started the Gerson therapy. There was Norman Walker, who came up with the first juicer. These were all like fathers of natural health. People back then, in the early 1900s, started writing about how the food started changing and what people were eating. They were no longer eating it naturally off the land. That's in the 1940s is when they started using pesticides in large quantities. Prior to that, people just grew food for themselves on their own land, and they didn't have hundreds of acres of apple orchards. They just had a few in their backyard. And it was when they started doing monocropping, trying to feed a lot of people more than themselves, that the need for pesticides first became a problem, and people started using pesticides. And back then, it was so toxic what they were using. They just had no idea. I have some really old-fashioned advertisements on my table over there to show you how insane some of the things they were doing. One of the scariest ones is an ad for women to use Lysol as a douche, and saying how great it was for their relationship now that she was using Lysol. I mean, so things have changed. I have just completed a book on a lot of old ads and what's changed in our food supply as well. And I was telling some people here, there's ads for morphine, cocaine, Quaaludes, just cocoa wine, which was cocaine in wine for mothers. And beer actually used to be a healthy food item. Beer used to be something that pregnant women were advised to drink for nutritional benefits because it was considered liquid bread. This was before they started adding sugar to beer. And sugar was another talk I gave a while ago with John, and that's a chapter in my book about how sugar has changed the face of so many things. So, different things have changed. So Dr. Bernard Jensen, he was in California. That's where I studied iridology. I studied the very last year of his life. He has passed on now. This is one of the early charts, and I don't have a laser pointer, so I'm using this. But this is one of the, this probably isn't going to get much clearer, but this is just to show you how the body fits into the iris. There's 28,000 nerve endings that all come from different organs and tissues in the body and have their endings in the iris. The eye, which is another, not yet. It's going to be some of my other slides. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but the eye is actually an extension of the brain. So this is how it figures, though. The head area is in the upper part of your eye. That represents that. And I have pictures of eyes I'm going to show you how you can see what might be affecting the upper part of your eye, your head. See, the brain is there. The heart is on the side, so the middle of your body goes along with the middle. The arms, the ribs, the lungs are in the middle. And at the bottom is your leg, your foot, your liver, kidneys, the prostate, the ovaries are all in this bottom part. So it kind of has a reference with the body. And I have two charts over there that show you embryologically why that is so, but let's see if I have already put them up here. So as I was saying, 28,000 nerve endings. Originally they didn't know what they were for. Why would they end in the eye? The doctors really didn't have an answer for that. But every time you do damage to one of your organs or you have excess toxins settling in those organs, it will show up in the iris before you're even having symptoms. There's 4 layers to the iris, and when those areas where the map correlates, they start showing darker and blacker. That's the back layer of the iris. That means toxins have settled at the deepest level. And then as you clean that out, it will get lighter and lighter, and you'll come back up to like a true blue is what a person's eye is. It shouldn't be an electric blue. It shouldn't be a bright white electric blue. That is not a healthy blue eye. It should be a deep blue. So you can see genetic weaknesses and inheritances in the iris from if you map a child, their parent, their grandparents, you can see the same markings. And they have found that the eyes change the most up till age 9, because that's when all the nerve endings are forming in the brain, and any damage that you're potentially doing to a child growing up as a child, it's all going to be before age 9, and that would be a permanent nerve pathway in their life. It becomes a permanent, rigid nerve pathway. So that's why the first 9 years of a child's life are the most critical in terms of what you're going to teach them, the experiences they're going to have. For instance, Walt Disney. He wrote a book, or I have his book, where he was stating that between the ages of 4 and 9, he lived on a farm in Kansas. And those were the happiest years of his life. He had all these animals around him that he loved. He loved picking the fruit off of the trees and running, free in nature and healthy air quality. And then they moved to Chicago. And he was so depressed, and he could never get over how happy he had been as a child. And it was up till age 9, and that's when he had moved. So what did he do with the rest of his life? He spent the rest of his life recreating that in Walt Disney World. The main street in Walt Disney is identical to the main street he grew up on. The characters that he has with Mickey Mouse, those are the talking animals. Those are all because he had talking relationships with all his farm animal friends. So that is how much those years shape a child. And it's true, it shows up in the iris in terms of, like I said, trauma. Hopefully, you won't have any. So the iris markings can also be matched up to the nerve supply of the fetus, because the eye is circular, so you might have a hard time picturing, well, how does the organs of the body line up with something circular? But a fetus is in a curled position, and you can see a chart over there that shows the fetus curled around the pupil, how the nerve endings all match up. So go on to the next one. So the large intestine, when the fetus is curled up like that, the large intestine actually is a straight line in the developing fetus initially. It's not the way it is, once it matures. It's actually a straight line. So they have found, and these are newer studies now, that all the germinational buds of all other organs originate from the large intestine. So, and as I said, I have a good chart over there. Unfortunately, I don't have it up here for you to see, but if you had the large intestine, that's why that is so critical for keeping your intestines healthy, because all the nerve supply, the hormones, there's at least 20 hormones, 70 to 80% of the body's immune system, all comes from the intestines. And if the intestines are clogged or layered or not properly working, they will, with their nerve supply, affect organs radiating outward from those original germinational buds. And so if you're having shoulder pain, for instance, you might not realize that it's actually from that section of the intestines where that nerve supply for that shoulder is. And that's what you can see in the eye. You can see if that part of the intestines is clogged or pinched or bloated or parasites or whatever might be happening. 9 times more messages flow from the gut to the brain than the brain to the gut. That's why, that expression when you're having a gut feeling is actually true. We just, always think it's coming from the brain, but the intestines are central. They say 90 to 95% of all problems in your health are related to something not working with the intestines. Those are just central to everything. Everything goes in there. Everything radiates outward from them. That's why when you're starting cleansing, you always start with the intestines, because even if you're eating great food and juices, if those intestines are layered, they're going to not absorb all that great stuff that you're eating. So first clean off the old layers, and then start eating the great stuff that will be absorbed from then on. And you can see a lot of changes in other areas just from that, just from your intestines. Okay, go on. So in Europe, this is a lot more common, iridology. There's at least 10,000 doctors that practice iridology along with their regular practice, because it's so much easier to just look in someone's eye and quickly get a snapshot of what the condition of their tissues are. If they're too acidic, you can see if they're going to be, if there's a diabetic problem happening, blood sugar disorders. You can see the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, the prostate gland, all these little gland systems. The thyroid, sometimes they take a thyroid test and it shows up maybe average or normal, and you're still saying, well, I don't believe it, there's something wrong, but it's because one half of the thyroid could be hyper and the other half could be hypo, and in a test it would combine to appear normal, but in the eye you can see that no, this half is actually behaving this way and this half is this way. So in the United States it's not as common, but people are picking up certain things. Some of the eye doctors do know certain markings that they just common ones they kind of know. As I said, there's personality, and in the iris there's colored pigments. You might have seen these in your own eyes. Does anybody notice any pigments in their eyes? In the movies or in books, they always talk about, oh, this person had the most beautiful gold-flecked eyes. That's always like this expression. The gold-flecked eyes probably means she has a pancreas problem. And on those big posters they have for movies with the big close-ups where you can see the actors and actresses' face really blown up close and you can clearly see their eyes. I can tell, those actors, they might look good on the outside, but I can see that, okay, their intestines are, not so great here. They've got some kidney issues or whatever. Like they say, a lot of people who work out and who are, let's just say, muscle men or, real into just weightlifting, and they might look perfectly great on the outside, but then those are the ones you always hear about just collapsing out of nowhere and having a heart attack, that they never even saw coming. So it's not just about how you look on the outside. The inside is where a lot of it is. And then the white fibers, which I was talking about before with the electric blue look, that everybody's like, oh wow, your eyes are so electric. That represents a lot of acidity in the tissues, and that person probably is going to be experiencing arthritis type symptoms or fibromyalgia. So go on to the next one. All right, so here's an example of pigments. And sometimes you can see these without anything, but I have a special camera, which I just received this week. It is the most deluxe, professional, state-of-the-art camera, which I'm so thrilled with, that has even better pictures than this. This is kind of blurry because it's blown up. But if you had an appointment with me, I would use that camera to take a close-up of your iris. It would be on the computer to be analyzed. And those pigments, because they are rust-colored, they do represent blood sugar disorders. If they're more brown, that would be liver problems. And then you would not only look at the color of the pigment, but where the pigment is. What organ is it sitting on top of? Because that indirectly shows that that organ also has a problem with it. This is the shape of the intestines going around the pupil here. And it should be pretty much circular. It shouldn't be like all wavy, or sometimes you'll see them pointy, or sometimes they'll be really tight against the pupil. I mean, this is pretty good diameter. It should be about a third of the way out. But the whiteness that is here on the edges, that's representing irritation in the intestines in that area, which the upper part is the transverse colon. So if someone has a prolapsed transverse colon, this would be like dipping down here also. But it's ballooning out a little bit here. This is showing, see, in the same section where the pigment is. And then different markings like these openings represent problems in those areas too. And when the tissues, the fibers start separating, like this is in the kidney area, that's showing a weakness with the fiber structure, that it's not as able to hold in nutrients, it's not as able to release toxins. And then this is actually the stomach zone, is a perfect circle directly around the pupil. This wavy thing is the intestines, but there's a stomach zone behind here. And the fact that it's grayer or darker than the rest of this eye shows it's under acidic. There's not enough hydrochloric acid being produced in the stomach, which sometimes happens just because the person has overproduced too much hydrochloric acid, and now the stomach is kind of burned out. So that would be an area that, I would recommend maybe two things. Apple cider vinegar will rebalance the pH and acidity of the stomach, whether it's too much or too little. Or I have like a stomach formula with herbs that will help the body naturally start reproducing the hydrochloric acid again. Because you don't want to take antacids. Those would only, what you would need is more acid, not less acid. And when people start having heartburn, a lot of times they think I'm having too much acid, but what's happening is your food is coming back up undigested because you don't have enough acid, and you need apple cider vinegar and a little glass of water with your meals would fix that. So the other thing is, not to get into too much health, but not to be drinking with your meals really, because you'll be diluting your natural enzymes and digestive juices. But if you are going to drink something, drink a little apple cider vinegar if you're having heartburn issues and you don't feel like you're digesting your food well. All right, go to the next one. And that white light over there, by the way, that was just the flash of the camera. So this is kind of showing you in words where things kind of are. Like the kidneys are down here in the bladder, the ovaries, the spleen, the heart, lungs, neck. That's the whole cone. One part of the eye, the left eye, has like the ascending colon, the transverse, and then the small intestines. The other eye has the transverse and the descending colon and the appendix and the rectum. So one side of the body, it doesn't directly correlate. Right doesn't directly go right to right, but because it crosses in the brain, it ends up becoming that what's happening in the right or the left, okay, the right side, the right eye is usually what's happening in the right side of the body because it crosses, not because there's a direct connection, but the wiring crosses in the brain and it flips it back. So go on to the next one. Okay, so this is kind of like, this is larger than, when you're taking a picture, you wouldn't get the eyelashes and all of that, but I just wanted to show you the clarity of looking at an eye. This is a great picture, but my camera would be even closer than this, is what I'm trying to say. But you can see how it's the dimensions of the terrain of the iris is like 3D, right? So you can see when, for instance, this one doesn't show it, but this is called the collarette wreath, which is that intestinal boundary, which is also the parasympathetic nervous system boundary. This is fine looking here as far as how high it is, but some people's gets really thick and raised and ropey, they call it, and that's really too much energy is happening. They're probably having spastic bowels, intermittent constipation back and forth, diarrhea, constipation. So you can see that kind of activity as well. This one, like I said, and the other thing I want to show you about this is all these lines here, those are potential for parasites, if you see a lot of those lines. That's where nerve endings, there is an absence of nerve energy just throughout that eye, and where parasites would love to live. Let's just say that. They might have cleaned them out, but they have the potential always to want parasites. So that's something just to stay on top of. Every so often you know what your weaknesses are. It helps you maintain your health instead of waiting for a crisis to happen. That's the eyes, you can see things before they happen, and they're usually the last to have the changes after you're done. But you can see when you take one picture at one time, 6 months to a year later, take another one if you've been improving, which has to be consistent. You have to consistently make a huge change in direction to change the eyes. Okay, go to the next one. So here's some white fibers in a blue eye. It's not too bad. It's not, I mean, maybe it's just because it's blurry, but all these white fibers, they really shouldn't be there at all. But this one, I mean, there's some that are just thick white eyes over blue, that blue really stands out. And that would be the acidity in the tissues that I was talking about. And then, of course, they have these pigments here. It looks a little bit yellow. Yellow has to do with the kidneys and the urinary system. So you would know, if that was your problem. And again, at the top of the intestines, which is the transverse colon, where the whiteness is, they do have some irritation going on there, which I would probably recommend the lower bowel formula, again, because that's where 90-95% of all your other health problems are going to come from, so you might as well get those working right. I kind of equate the intestines to like the body of a worm. And our intestines are like worms in a compost bin. They want the same things worms in a compost bin want, which is not meats and cheeses and dairy and bread. Worms want vegetables and fruits and things that aren't going to attract the rats. If you ever compost, you notice, what you put in there will determine if it smells and what comes to decompose it. Same thing with our intestines. If you think of them as a compost bin, we have that same structure like a worm. Okay, go. So this one, there's three basic eye colors. There's brown, there's blue, and then there's a mixed, which they call a biliary, which is part brown, mostly around the center, and then more of a bluish green toward the outside, which is kind of what this one is looking like. We don't have the best lighting in here, but what I want to show you about this, but really, even if this was a biliary, though, this brown should be like more out here if it was a mixed. A lot of times, if this was a blue eye, which I'm not saying, I can't really tell if it's a blue eye or not. I know there's brown in there, but that's all in the intestinal area, which would represent old fecal matter that needs to be removed to clean that out and lighten that up. And that can get a lot darker, and that can be orange, which might also show candida. But in this eye, you see all those white, like puffy things going in a circle? That's the lymphatic system. And when there are puffy clouds like that, that's kind of a genetic weakness that a lot of blue-eyed people have, mostly. But these are white now, which is actually one of the first stages of that being congested. They can become yellow, then go to brown, then go to dark brown, and that's as they get advanced into more and more congestion. And when I've seen people with cancer, that's what happens. The lymphatic system starts, and it doesn't stay on the outside, it starts moving in toward the pupil in a ring that starts turning yellow, brown, darker brown, which means it's going deeper into the muscles. There's also rings in the eye that represent, like the outer area is the skin, then it goes to, I have a chart on that, but so as it starts going inward, you can see that, the person is really probably getting really toxic and congested. When things aren't moving, fluids aren't moving, clearing toxins out, nutrients in, you just start stagnating. That's what cancer basically is. Okay, go on. Okay, so that's a better blue. But see, in this eye, there's reasons why the pupil can be bigger like that. One of them could just be because of the lighting. One of them could be if you were on certain drugs or medications that can make you have a larger pupil. And have you ever seen like a cat's eyes, when they're fearful or about to pounce? But so in this case, and when that happens, when the pupil enlarges like that, it squishes all the other things. So the intestinal zone, you can see, is just so tightly wrapped around that pupil. So if that was really the case, which I'd have to see her with her, not with an eye, that pupil that large, but that would represent a really, and it probably is really narrow, because even just to be so tightly like that, a really narrow constricted intestinal zone, which, means food is having a hard time passing through, probably. It should be a third of the way out. All right, well, and another thing, this dark ring going all the way around the outside represents the skin zone, and that's a condition where she probably has a hard time sweating or eliminating toxins through the skin, that dark circle on the outside. Okay, go. So the sclera is another place you can see markings that are pointers, and the sclera has its own map as well. But the blood vessels are indicators, secondary indicators that you can use to not just have something show up in the iris, but then you check the sclera as well, and you see if it's appearing in the sclera at the same time. So this slide isn't showing this, but where it's zigzagging like this, that's called a meandering blood vessel, and that's showing that the person has poor blood vessel strength, like they probably have, what's that, varicose veins, or just weakness in their blood vessels. You could probably see it in their skins. And ones that are just straight lines, those are also, they have their own area in the sclera, but they're pointing. You have to look in the iris of where they're pointing. Like this one is kind of in the the leg-foot zone pointing to. So I would be asking, when I see people, do you have pain in your foot? Are you noticing any weakness there? And before, you would fill out a form about things that you know about yourself, but before I even look at that, I would ask you questions about what I'm seeing in the eye, and it opens up a whole nother story that things you might not have even remembered. Okay, go to the next one. So here's just a whole bunch of different eye colors to show you how different people's eyes are. And again, I don't know if you saw somebody like that, if you would compliment them, would you ever say, wow, your eyes are so interesting? That's what I would say. And then I would say, can I take your picture? But that's really a bad situation. And that's what I mean by the blue. And that's a blue eye, but clearly there's something going wrong with the intestines. You see how that orange is all in that zone in there? And then here, this whiteness going around it, that's a cholesterol ring. That shows someone who is not digesting their cholesterol well, having to do with the liver. And keep going. I want to show some more. So that's, it would be showing like arterial plaquing inside their arteries and veins. Sometimes you just see it in the top part. There's another kind of thing that looks like this. And that also shows where blood is not going. So sometimes you see it in the top of the eye. That means there's not a lot of blood circulation going into the head area. They probably have problems remembering, problems with eyesight, hearing, headaches, whatever. And you can see where this is not it, but there's another marking similar that shows you where the whiteness is. That's where there's no blood going. Okay, go to the next one, please. And this is kind of like the map for the iris and how it would kind of overlay onto the eye. So, that's what I would be looking for, is what is fitting into those sectors to see where it goes. Go to the next one, please. And this is another one, the same thing, just to show you. The top part is the head, the bottom is the feet, the sides are the middle, and they kind of have those organs showing you where they are. Go down. Another, just a side view of the same thing, like that side is the ribs and the heart, the breast. Spine is in there. The pupil itself represents the spinal cord. So if there's flattening or pointedness in the pupil, you can see which vertebrae are in need of maybe an adjustment from a chiropractor. You can see which cervix based on the pupil if it's not perfectly round. Okay, go to the next one. And that's showing, what, like somebody with a pigment in their liver area, how it would be a toxic liver sign. Go on. So here's one with more of that thicker white, and it's even kind of yellow. And the stages are, as I said, white to yellow to brown to darker brown as how much congestion is advancing, and you can reverse that. So that's why when you first take one picture, you would want to know, is this an improving situation or is this situation going in that direction? This person probably has a lot of gout as well. That's a really thick, and the yellow would have to do with a lymphatic wash. There's no such thing as a green eye. It's a blue eye with a yellow lymphatic wash that makes it look green. Go on. So these openings, that's things I would be looking for. There's like healing signs. You can tell when something's trying to heal or raise up from that back toxic darker level when it starts lightening. And then there's personality based on those markings as well. That would see like a certain personality just based on where those openings are. And something like this, these two markings here, they're called stair steps. They're diamond shapes that are in lines together. Those are a serious sign, which is a precancerous sign for that organ. And it could be cancer, but I would never say it was cancer. I would say go get that checked out though. So that's a serious sign when you see it's called a stair step. Go ahead. And same thing, you can see how that's not a brown eye, that's a blue eye. And this is stuff in the intestinal area. And this is a huge opening over here in that organ. So that person really, their constitutional makeup, the tissues are not very strong, they're very weak just in general with all those openings. That's a glandular problem as well with glands. There's body types and systems. Okay, let's wrap this up. Keep going. Well, let's fly through the rest. That's just another one. See, now you can see that dark brown in there. That shouldn't be there. Okay, go on. And these were the zones I talked about. The outer one is the skin. As it starts moving into the lymphatic, then the inner organs. There's this one. There's a better one too. It shows blood, bones, muscle. Go on. So the eyes are definitely magical, and they reveal so much. Go on. And yeah, that's kind of getting gray, right? Like they're kind of losing all colors. So that's just showing you another person who's just like shutting down. Things are just turning gray and shutting down. The stomach zone is gray. Their whole eye is gray. Go on. Go on. So there you have it again, you know, where it'd be obvious, especially in little kids. Go on. And that's what I do. It's just look into people's eyes, except she's looking in the pupil. It's the other parts that are where it is. Actually, the pupil, that's a whole other area they have found. There's another map just for the pupil. Go on. And those markings, you need a really high microscope to see. Just more of the same. You can now see that pigments and everything, they should not be there, and they will go away when you fix that. Go on. And there's the green eye that I was talking about, which really is a blue with a yellow wash. Go on. Just more, see, now you can see that lymphatic ring moving in, right? That's not the intestines, that's that outer lymphatic zone. It's moving in deeper into the muscles now. And there's the chart that I have on the back table showing the detail of where everything is. Go on. And then that's just another type of eye. This person has lots of those stair steps, little ones. See them? Okay. Oh, go back a second real quick. Okay. See, now you can see this fuzziness, this vagueness. That's, I mean, maybe they have contacts on. So, but if they didn't, that would be partly showing, well, depending on if it's that cholesterol ring or the lack of blood flow. It's not clear what that is on that one, because it's not clear. Go on. Okay, so iridology has to do with body, mind, and spirit. Go on. And that's just another one of the organs. Go on. That's what my camera looks like, except my camera is actually fancier than this because I have side lighting as well. So you really get the high def 3D look. Go on. So never panic, keep calm, and trust an iridologist. You can just see the whole picture. You know, I've even been able to find people where I saw a marking in their eye. Go to the next one. And that's kind of what I would be doing on the computer. But where I saw a marking, and I actually said, I just have to ask you this question because it was in a certain area, and I said to a man, you know, were you ever sexually abused as a child by another man? And they said yes, and this has happened 3 times, just from a marking I saw in the eye. And then that causes a whole breakdown, and that has to lead with how trauma, emotions all affect what's going on in the organs today. Go on. So I was going to do this thing for 15 minutes for $20, but my camera is so nice, I just couldn't bring it. It's just, I decided it's too complicated. It's just so high-tech now that my normal session is $120. It's a 2-hour appointment. It does include drug-free nutritional recommendations and using food as medicine. So if you're interested, I do have a sign-up sheet on my table, and if you want any questions, my table's over there. And that's it.
Thank you, Susan.